The first time I warned the HOA board, I wasn't just some cranky neighbor. I was a veteran holding folders of maps, aerial photos, and signed letters from the city planner. I told them plain as day, if you cut a road through my wetlands, the water will rise and take it back. They smirked, waved me off, and poured their asphalt anyway. They thought rules, nature, and even karma itself bowed to their board meetings. But wetlands don't negotiate, and storms don't ask for permission. The night the flood came, the road didn't just crack, it vanished, swallowed whole, as if the land was laughing at their arrogance. And in that moment, every denial, every fake smile, every smug "thank you for your input" collapsed with the pavement. Before we dive into this wild story, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I love seeing how far these HOA tales travel. And hey, if you enjoy a good dose of drama, revenge, and poetic justice, make sure you subscribe. This is one HOA story you won't want to miss. I still remember the smell of damp earth clinging to my boots that evening when I walked into the community center. The HOA board was seated in a perfect row, papers, stacked neatly, water bottles aligned, and that smug little air of authority hanging in the fluorescent lights. Karen, the president, sat in the middle like a queen bee, her pearl earrings glinting each time she shifted in her chair. I wasn't there to play nice. I had a folder under my arm, maps printed in color, aerial photos of the floodplain, and a city planner's letter warning against any construction through my wetlands. It wasn't opinion, it was law. It was science. It was common sense. When they called my name, I stood and spoke in a steady voice. If you build that road, I said, pointing to the red circled lines on the photos, it will flood. Not maybe, not someday. It will. And when it does, it won't just wash out your pavement. It'll back water into culverts, crack retaining walls, and damage homes. You'll have lawsuits stacked higher than this table. Karen smiled politely like I was a child speaking out of turn. Thank you for your input, Mr. Halstead. Your time is limited to 3 minutes. Please don't repeat points from last month. The room chuckled faintly, some residents hiding their grins behind coffee cups. I wanted to scream. Instead, I kept my jaw locked. My 3 minutes were up, but the truth didn't have a timer. You ignore this land at your own risk, I muttered as I sat down. No one looked at me. No one cared. A man in the back scrolled on his phone. A woman whispered about her lawn service. To them, this wasn't life or death. It was convenience. A road meant higher property values, easier access to the highway, faster commutes. They didn't see the storm clouds in the maps I carried. They only saw dollar signs. But my wetlands weren't just a muddy patch of earth. They were 5 acres of living history. My father had spent 20 years restoring that land after a failed golf course developer nearly killed it back in the 1982. He planted native reeds, rebuilt natural levees, and worked hand in hand with a local university to bring back frogs, birds, and wildflowers. He used to say the marsh breathed, it remembered. When he died, I promised him no one would touch it. And yet here I was staring at people who treated it like a blank space on their subdivision map. The week after that meeting, I found surveyors on my property. Yellow vests, tripods, clipboards, the whole parade. I walked straight into the mud to confront them. Who told you to be here? I asked. One shrugged. HOA hired us, said permits are squared away. I called the city that afternoon. No permits had been filed. None. Which meant the HOA was moving on confidence, not legality. That night, I went to find Karen after her yoga class at the clubhouse. She didn't even take her earbuds out, just smiled that infuriating smile. The board believes this road will benefit everyone. Don't be so territorial. Territorial, the word stung like a slap. I'd defended land overseas, worn camouflage, carried rifles through dust and fire. Now here I was, fighting to defend mud and reeds, and she dismissed it as me being territorial. Arrogance like that has a way of planting seeds. Seeds that don't sprout until the rain comes. Within days, gravel trucks were rolling in. They poured stone across the wetlands like it was theirs to carve. I documented everything, photos, timestamps, drone footage. I even saved soil samples in jars, each one proof of what they were killing. The marsh screamed in silence, birds scattered, frogs, went mute, water began pooling where it never had before. I wasn't naive. I knew this wasn't just incompetence. This was power. Karen's brother-in-law worked for the zoning committee. Another board member golfed with the mayor's aide. They weren't just ignoring me, they were daring me to fight back. And the truth, I was ready. That's when I met Rivera, my neighbor 3 lots down. Retired school teacher, walked with a cane and carried a memory sharper than any archive. Son, he said, pulling out a yellowed newspaper, clipping back in '94, the flood almost took my porch clean off. Same marsh, same warning. You fight them hard. That land remembers. I took the clipping, scanned it, and added it to my growing arsenal. But each time I spoke at a meeting, I was met with the same silence, the same rolling eyes. People just wanted their HOA fees low and their lawns neat. The wetlands, too abstract, too inconvenient. Then came the glossy newsletter. A smiling photo of Karen, shovel in hand, standing on what used to be my marsh. The headline, Community Access Road Brings Progress to Whispering Pines. Progress. That was their word for butchery. They even added a tagline, Bridging Our Future Together. The only bridge they built was between arrogance and disaster. And I knew deep down disaster was already on its way. Karma doesn't knock politely, it waits, it watches. And when the moment comes, it hits harder than any gavel Karen ever slammed in those meetings. The sound of engines woke me before sunrise. At first I thought it was the garbage trucks making their usual rounds, but when I stepped out onto my porch, the truth roared into my chest. Bulldozers, excavators, cement mixers lined up in a convoy at the edge of my wetlands. The sky was still gray, mist rising from the marsh, and there they were, giant yellow machines like invaders stomping across land that wasn't theirs. I pulled on my boots so fast I didn't even lace them. The mud clung thick and sucking, but I pushed through until I reached the first bulldozer. "You're trespassing," I shouted. My voice cracked through the morning air, but the machines didn't stop. A man with a clipboard finally waved the driver down and walked toward me with that bureaucratic smirk. "Sir, take it up with the HOA. We have authorization." "Authorization," I snapped. "From who?" "Because the city told me no permits were filed." He shrugged. "We've got stamped documents." "Looks official enough." I demanded to see them. He held up a laminated sheet with a faint stamp in the corner. The moment I laid eyes on it, I knew something was wrong. Wrong font, wrong format. I dealt with enough paperwork in the military to spot a forgery. My stomach churned. These people weren't just careless. They were bold enough to fake permits. I didn't lunge. That's what they wanted for me to swing, to give them an excuse to paint me as the angry vet. Instead, I pulled out my phone and filmed. Every machine, every worker, every tire-crushing reeds my father had planted by hand. When I walked back to the house, I dialed the city planner's office. A young clerk answered, sounding groggy. "No," he confirmed, tapping keys. "There are no permits on file for construction at your parcel. None." He paused. "If they're claiming otherwise, you should contact enforcement." I already had. But enforcement was buried under bureaucracy, and the HOA knew it. They thrived in that space between action and accountability, where arrogance lived unchecked. By noon, the first layer of gravel had been dumped, cutting a gray scar across the marsh. Frogs leapt blindly from the rumbling birds, scattered in panicked swarms. My land was bleeding, and the board called it beautification. That night, I drove past the clubhouse. Through the glass doors, I saw Karen hosting a community update session. There she was, standing in front of a poster board that read, "Green Path Initiative, a step toward togetherness." Residents nodded along, sipping lattes, clapping politely. She spoke like a politician. This pathway isn't just a road, it's a future of unity and progress. I parked across the street, fists clenched around the steering wheel. My wetlands weren't a metaphor. They were a living ecosystem with legal protections the board was trampling. The next day, I cornered Karen in the parking lot. The morning sun caught her tortoiseshell glasses as she adjusted them with calculated calm. "Karen," I said, my tone steady but sharp, "you know this is illegal. You know that road will flood." She didn't even flinch. "The board believes this will benefit everyone." "Stop being so territorial." That word again, territorial. As though defending your home, your father's legacy, made you petty. I wanted to laugh in her face. Instead, I recorded her response, my phone tucked subtly in my palm. Later that afternoon, I emailed the Department of Environmental Compliance. I attached soil samples, drone photos, the forged permit, and now Karen's dismissive words. Their reply was polite but hollow. "We'll review your case." Given current priorities, response may be delayed. Delayed. That's the poison word HOA boards count on. But I wasn't done. I set up motion-triggered cameras along the property line. One strapped to the old cypress tree, another hidden inside a birdhouse, a third near the culvert where I knew water pressure would spike first. If they wanted to lie, I would have receipts. By week's end, the road stretched halfway across the marsh. Asphalt trucks queued up like soldiers waiting to march. At night, their hazard lights glowed red in the mist like eyes watching me from the dark. The wetlands groaned under their weight. Water pooled where it never had before. Neighbors started whispering about soggy lawns, strange smells, frogs disappearing. I knocked on doors one by one. Most brushed me off, but a few listened. Jenny from Lot 14 admitted her backyard fence was leaning from new runoff. A young couple said their toddler's sandbox flooded for the first time in years. Slowly, cracks spread through Karen's empire. Still, the majority clung to her promises. After all, she said the road would raise property values, cut commute times, make Whispering Pines more connected. Who could argue with progress? I could. Because progress built on lies always collapses. One evening I found Rivera sitting on his porch cane, leaning against the railing, eyes narrowed at the distant hum of machines. He tapped a yellowed newspaper, clipping into my hand. 94, he said. This whole neighborhood nearly drowned. They think they're smarter than water. They're not. The land always wins. I scanned the article into my growing digital file, already thicker than any HOA binder. But every step I took felt like shouting into a hurricane. The board waved at me with forced smiles, their eyes cold. The machines kept rolling. Then the newsletter arrived. On the front page, a photo of Karen, Derek, and Martha holding a ceremonial shovel, grins plastered across their faces. The headline, Community Access Road, a milestone for our neighborhood. At the bottom, Together we're building bridges. I laughed bitterly. They weren't building bridges. They were building karma, brick by brick, wheel by wheel. As storm season crept closer, the marsh grew restless. The water level rose inch by inch, invisible to anyone who didn't know the land's language. But I knew. My father had taught me how to read the reeds, the frogs, the silence, and the silence was deafening. HOA thought they were in control. They thought a road would tame nature. What they didn't realize was that every load of gravel, every fake permit, every arrogant smile was writing their own sentence. And the storm was the judge. I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. The night Rivera handed me that faded clipping about the flood of 94, I sat at my kitchen table staring at it like it was a prophecy. The black and white photo showed the subdivision half-submerged water, lapping at porches, cars bobbing like toys. The headline read, Unseasonal Storm Swamps, Whispering Pines, Dozens Displaced. Below it a quote from Rivera himself, 30 years younger, this land remembers. You can't fight water. That line rang in my ears as I scanned the article into my growing archive. The folder on my laptop now contained decades of evidence, maps, photos, videos, weather projections, even my father's old journals. I wasn't just a cranky neighbor anymore. I was the custodian of the land's memory. The following weekend, I walked door to door. At first, I expected slammed doors, maybe the occasional muttered insult about being that guy. But slowly, things shifted. Jenny, from Lot 14, invited me into her backyard where we stood ankle-deep in water that had never been there before. Her fence leaned at a crooked angle. I've lived here 15 years, she whispered, eyes darting like she was afraid someone might overhear. This never happened until they started pouring that road. She wasn't the only one. The young couple from Lot 22 showed me their toddler's sandbox, soggy and half-collapsed plastic toys floating in the muck. They said their drains gurgled after every rainstorm now. Karen told us it was normal, the husband muttered, shaking his head. But it doesn't feel normal. I added their testimonies to my file. Piece by piece, the cracks in the HOA's shiny facade widened. Still, most of the neighborhood clung to Karen's words. She was clever, I'll give her that. She hosted live streams from her manicured backyard hydrangeas, blooming behind her, her voice calm and polished. The Green Path project she cooed is a step toward unity. It will make our community more connected, safer, and more beautiful. Progress can be uncomfortable, but it always pays off. Uncomfortable. That was her word for destruction. I replayed her video twice, listening to the careful cadence, the rehearsed smile. She knew exactly what she was doing, dressing up greed in the costume of improvement. Meanwhile, the marsh itself began to change. I noticed stagnant pools forming in places where water once drained freely. Mosquitoes bred in the stillness. The frogs that had croaked nightly went eerily quiet. I walked the property at dusk, flashlight cutting across the scar of gravel, and I swore I could hear the ground groaning under the weight of it. One afternoon, I returned home to find an official-looking envelope taped to my door. Inside was a letter from the HOA notice of non-compliance failure to maintain adjacent terrain. They accused me of neglecting my land in a way that increased erosion risk for their road. The irony nearly made me choke. They destroyed my wetlands and then tried to blame me for the consequences. I forwarded the letter to Carla, my attorney from the environmental nonprofit. Her reply came back sharp as a blade. Let them try. We'll counter with everything. This is intimidation, not law. That night I called Rivera. He invited me over for whiskey on his porch. We sat in the sticky summer air cane, resting against his chair, cicadas screaming from the trees. They think they're untouchable, he said, his voice gravelly, but arrogance has a way of circling back. You'll see. He tapped his temple. The land always collects its debts. I believed him. I could feel the debt building with every rumble of machinery, every newsletter headline, every Facebook post Karen crafted to spin the narrative. They were stacking karma like sandbags, thinking it would shield them. But karma doesn't shield, it strikes. At the next board meeting, I brought Rivera's clipping and copies of residents' complaints. I waited patiently, as neighbors droned about paint colors and mailbox heights. Finally, it was my turn. I stood holding the paper high. In 1994, this community nearly drowned, I said, voice echoing against the fluorescent-lit walls. The same marsh you're paving over saved you then by absorbing water, and now you're gutting it. Karen tilted her head, lips pressed into that tight little smile. Thank you for your perspective, Mr. Halstead. But our engineers have confirmed the project is safe. Safe. The room buzzed faintly, some residents nodding, others shifting uneasily. I scanned their faces, searching for cracks of doubt. Jenny's eyes met mine. Rivera gave a slow nod. The couple from Lot 22 avoided my gaze, but I could tell they were thinking. Seeds were being planted. After the meeting, as residents filed out, Karen intercepted me. She leaned close, her perfume, cloying her voice a whisper sharp enough to cut glass. You need to stop, Daniel. You're scaring people. This road will happen whether you like it or not. Do yourself a favor and accept it. I leaned in closer. Karen, you're not fighting me. You're fighting nature, and nature always wins. Her smile faltered just for a second before she slipped back into her mask. The following morning, trucks rumbled back and laying down asphalt. The smell of tar clung to the air, heavy and suffocating. I set my drone to hover above, recording every moment. From above, the black ribbon of pavement looked grotesque, cutting through green like a wound that would never heal. I sent the footage to Carla. She replied within the hour, "Good. Keep documenting. The storm season is coming. When it hits, they won't have anywhere to hide." And she was right. The storm season was brewing. The radar was already flashing warnings of tropical depressions forming off the coast. The marsh sensed it. I could feel it too, a restless electricity in the air, like the land itself was holding its breath. The board thought they'd won. They thought my silence at meetings, my quiet filming meant I was beaten. But they didn't understand. I wasn't fighting for applause or for headlines. I was fighting for the inevitable. Because history has a way of repeating itself. And karma doesn't need my help. It was already coming, carried on dark clouds gathering far out at sea. By late August, the air itself felt heavy. You could taste the storm before it even formed. Humidity clung to every breath, and the cicadas screamed louder than usual, like they too sensed what was brewing offshore. The weather reports confirmed my gut, a tropical storm forming in the Gulf, one that could swell into something nastier. For me, it wasn't fear, it was inevitability. I'd seen this before in uniform and out. The land always keeps receipts, and when the sky opens, debts get collected. The HOA, of course, played their usual game. A glossy newsletter landed in every mailbox with a headline in bold green font, "Stay calm and carry on, our road is ready." The article underneath, written by none other than Phil, the newsletter chair, reassured residents that the new drainage ditches and culverts were engineered to withstand seasonal rainfall. It even included a photo of Karen standing with her arms folded in front of the asphalt, wearing a beige cardigan and that smug grin like a queen presenting her castle. I nearly laughed when I read it. Engineered, they hadn't even filed permits. The culverts they bragged about were nothing more than cheap pipes jammed beneath fill dirt. Any soldier with half a brain could tell you the first surge of real water would rip them out like loose teeth. I wasn't just watching, though. I was preparing. My cameras were in place, one strapped to the cypress tree my father had planted, another hidden in a birdhouse near the culvert, and a third angled from my own roof. I tested the feeds every night, checking timestamps, sharpening my evidence. My garage was lined with jars of soil samples, each one labeled with date and location. If they wanted a courtroom battle, I was building my arsenal piece by piece. But something else was happening. People were starting to whisper. Jenny from Lot 14 posted a photo on the neighborhood Facebook group, her yard flooded ankle deep after a modest rain. "Never happened before the road," she wrote. Replies flooded, in some sympathetic, others parroting Karen's line, "It's just storm season, don't panic." Then Rivera chimed in, his words cutting sharper than mine ever could. "This land has flooded before. It will flood again. Pave over nature, and you'll pay." He attached a scan of his old newspaper clipping from 1994. Dozens of likes popped up under his comment, many from people who usually stayed silent. Karen tried to regain control with a live stream. I watched from my laptop, shaking my head. She had staged it perfectly, hydrangeas blooming behind her pearl earrings, gleaming voice, calm as a pastor. "Friends and neighbors," she said, "I know some of you are nervous. Change is always unsettling. But rest assured, our engineers and contractors have followed every guideline. This road is not just safe, it's a gift to our community. Safe, gift, progress." She weaponized language like armor. But words don't hold back water. That night clouds gathered thick over the horizon. I walked the marsh with a flashlight, the beam cutting across the scar of asphalt. Already the road looked wrong, slightly sunken in the middle, water pooling where it should have drained. Frogs croaked half-heartedly, then fell silent. The silence chilled me more than the storm clouds. The next day, the storm warning escalated. The National Weather Service issued an advisory: tropical storm likely to make landfall within 48 hours. The county sent alerts about possible flash flooding. And the HOA. They sent another email blast with the subject line, "Whispering Pines Flood Plan Update." I opened it, half curious, half dreading. Inside it boiled down to this: "Our drainage system is sufficient. Remain calm. Sandbags will be available at the clubhouse if necessary." Sufficient. I wanted to drive down to the clubhouse and shove a jar of marsh water into Karen's manicured hands. Instead, I forwarded the email to Carla, my attorney. She replied quickly, "Good. Keep everything. This shows negligence." Meanwhile, the community itself was splitting. I saw it in the glances at the mailbox kiosk, in the hushed conversations on sidewalks. Some people avoided me, clutching their newsletters like a Bible. Others leaned in close, whispering, "I think you're right." The water's rising faster than usual. The tension boiled over at the next board meeting. The storm clouds outside pressed against the windows, rain already hammering down. The room was packed, damp jackets clinging to chairs, umbrellas dripping in the corner. Karen sat at the center of the table, clipboard in front of her, pearls gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Derek leaned back in his chair like he was at a backyard cookout, not a potential disaster briefing. Martha shuffled through agenda packets, pretending everything was normal. The meeting opened with minor complaints: tennis courts closed too long, someone upset about garden shed paint colors. Then Jenny stood, her voice shaking. She held up a photo of her backyard, water swirling around her kid's swing set. "This," she said, "is 6 inches of standing water from this morning. That never happened before." Karen tilted her head, wearing sympathy like perfume. "That's likely due to the new drainage redirect. Perfectly normal during seasonal rain." Jenny looked straight at me. "You warned them, didn't you?" I nodded. The room buzzed. Rivera rose, next, cane thumping against the floor. "I lived through the '94 flood. I saw what happens when you block water. It always wins. It nearly took my house then. And you fools are building right into its path." His voice cracked with age, but cut sharper than any gavel. Karen's smile tightened. "We appreciate your perspective, Mr. Rivera, but our engineers—" "No," I interrupted, standing slowly. All eyes turned to me. My voice was steady, my chest tight. "You ignored legal documents. You ignored the city planner's warning. You ignored an environmental impact report. And now the rain's here, and you want to act surprised. This isn't engineering. This is arrogance." Murmurs filled the room. Derek scoffed, waving a hand. "You're exaggerating. We've had storms before." I reached into my satchel and unfolded a map. "This is a flood zone chart from the county planning office. It shows exactly where the surge path runs, and your road sits dead center." I turned to the crowd. "Do you understand what that means? When the water comes, it won't go around. It'll go through. Into your homes, into your streets." The room shifted. People whispered uneasy, some nodding, some pale-faced. Karen slammed her gavel. "This meeting is not a trial. We are here to provide updates, not incite fear." I locked eyes with her. "You should be afraid, because if even half of this storm hits us tonight, your road won't hold, and neither will your excuses." A clap broke the silence. Then another. Soon a ripple of applause filled the room, not loud, but enough to make Karen flinch. She banged her gavel again, face flushed. "This meeting is adjourned," she snapped, rising so quickly her chair toppled behind her. The room dissolved into chaos. People shouted over each other, demanding answers. Some surged toward the board table. I slipped out the side door, rain slapping my shoulders like needles. The storm had arrived. Driving home, the wipers barely kept up. Gutters overflowed, streets shimmered with running water. By the time I pulled into my driveway, a thin stream was already trickling along the edge of my property. I grabbed my flashlight and walked the perimeter of the marsh. The new road glistened under the downpour, water pooling on its surface, refusing to drain. The frogs were silent. The air buzzed with a tension deeper than the storm itself. It was the land holding its breath. And I whispered into the wind, "You warned them. Now show them." The storm didn't wait politely on the horizon. By morning, the rain was steady, unrelenting, a gray curtain draped over whispering pines. Gutters, overflowed storm drains, gurgled like they were choking, and the road, Karen's prized green path, was already collecting puddles big enough to swallow a bicycle. I stood on my porch with coffee gone cold in my hand, watching water slide across asphalt instead of into the soil where it used to disappear. The wetlands weren't breathing. They were suffocating under concrete. That evening, the HOA board insisted on holding their scheduled meeting as if they could will away the storm by sticking to their agenda. By 6:30, the parking lot was a mess of umbrellas and splashing shoes. Neighbors shuffled in shaking rain off coats, muttering about power flickers and flooded lawns. The fluorescent-lit hall smelled of damp wool and too much coffee. Karen sat at the center of the long table, pearl earrings gleaming like always, clipboard neatly stacked with papers she probably wouldn't read. Derek leaned back in his chair, grinning like this was just another barbecue. Martha fiddled with the agenda packets, flipping pages like it mattered what color the tennis court benches would be when half the subdivision was starting to drown. I took my seat at the far end of the table. My name tag faced slightly away from the audience, always their little trick to remind me I wasn't really one of them. Fine. Tonight I didn't need a name tag. The storm would say my name louder than I ever could. The meeting began with minor complaints, why the clubhouse Wi-Fi was spotty when the pool heater would be fixed. I clenched my fists under the table. Outside, the rain hammered harder, rattling the windows like knuckles against glass. Then Jenny stood. She held up a photo in one trembling hand. Her voice shook, but she forced the words out. "This was my backyard this morning, 6 inches of standing water. I've lived here 15 years, and it never looked like this." The photo made its way down the row of board members. Karen didn't even blink. She tilted her head, her smile sweet as poison. "That's likely due to the new drainage redirect. Perfectly normal during heavy rain. We'll monitor it." Jenny looked at me instead. "You warned them, didn't you?" I nodded once. The room shifted. Murmurs rose, umbrellas still dripping onto the floor, damp jackets squeaking against plastic chairs. Rivera pushed himself up next Kane, thumping like a gavel. "I lived through the '94 flood," he barked, his voice rough but clear. "You can't pave over water and expect it to behave. That marsh saved us then. You've crippled it now. The land remembers whether you fools do or not." His words hit like thunder. Neighbors glanced at each other uneasy, some nodding, some frowning. Karen cleared her throat pearls, bobbing with the motion. "Thank you, Mr. Rivera. We appreciate your history, but our engineers have signed off." "No," I cut in, standing slowly. The whole room turned toward me, the air thick with rain pounding the roof. My voice was low but steady. "You ignored me at every step. I gave you legal documents. I showed you flood zone charts. I handed you an environmental impact report. You dismissed it all. And now you want to pretend this is just weather. This isn't weather. This is negligence, dressed up as progress." Derek laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. "Here we go again. Every storm's the end of the world with this guy." I didn't flinch. Instead, I reached into my satchel and pulled out a folded map. I slapped it flat on the table so hard it echoed. "This is from the county planning office, updated 5 years ago. The flood surge path runs directly where you poured that road. Do you know what that means? When the water rises, and it won't go around. It will go through. Right into your homes. Right into your streets." Gasps, whispers, the sound of rain intensifying outside like it was punctuating my words. Jenny's face went pale. Rivera nodded, eyes shining with vindication. Even Martha looked shaken, her hands frozen on her packet. Karen's smile cracked. "This meeting is not a trial," she snapped, gavel slamming down. "We are here to provide updates, not spread fear." I leaned forward, meeting her eyes. "Fear, you should be afraid. Because when this storm hits, no gavel, no newsletter, no live stream will save you." The silence held for a beat. Then someone in the back clapped. Another followed. Soon the room filled with hesitant but undeniable applause. It wasn't a standing ovation, but it was enough to make Karen's mask falter. Her gavel cracked again. "This meeting is adjourned," she barked, rising so quickly her chair toppled behind her. Papers spilled from her clipboard. Derek muttered something under his breath, but even he didn't look so smug now. Chaos exploded. Residents crowded the front, voices raised, demanding answers. Jenny shoved her photo into Karen's face. Rivera's cane thumped against the tile like a war drum. The storm rattled the building, wind whistling through the old seals in the windows. It felt like the land itself was shaking, the walls demanding to be heard. I slipped out the side door, rain immediately pelting my face, soaking through my jacket. I didn't need to hear more. Their empire of arrogance was already cracking. Driving home was like steering through a river. Streets shimmered with runoff water gurgling at the edges. Headlights reflected off slick asphalt, distorted and wavering. By the time I pulled into my driveway, a thin stream had already carved its way along the edge of my property. I grabbed my flashlight and walked straight into the downpour. My boots sank deep in mud as I circled the marsh. The new road glistened dark and wrong its surface, already dipping in places, water collecting in shallow pools. The culvert Karen bragged about rattled under the force of rushing water, loose stones scattering like marbles. The frogs were silent. The air hummed with electricity, not just from lightning but from something older, something deeper. The marsh was awake, restless, coiled like a spring. I aimed my beam at the road, water streaming across it, and felt it in my bones. This was no longer about warnings. No more charts, no more maps, no more debates. The reckoning had begun. I whispered into the rain, the same words my father used to say when we stood at the edge of the marsh during storms. The land will always speak. And that night, as thunder cracked and water pressed harder against the scar of asphalt, I knew karma was clearing its throat. The storm gathered its strength like an army at the gates. By the time the clock struck midnight, rain wasn't falling anymore, it was attacking. Sheets of water hammered down, ricocheting off rooftops, blurring streetlights into ghostly halos. The wetlands that once absorbed every drop now stood strangled beneath the road, water surging higher with nowhere to go. I stood on my porch jacket, soaked through flashlight beam, cutting across a world that looked both familiar and foreign. The asphalt shimmered under the floodlights from my motion-triggered cameras. From afar, it looked like a black ribbon floating on restless water. But the closer I looked, the more I saw the truth, cracks forming, like veins, puddles merging into ponds, culverts groaning as the current battered them. At 1, 2, 4, 7 a.m., the first fracture split across the road. I caught it on my drone feed, an ugly, jagged line tearing through the asphalt. The sound reached me seconds later, a hollow crack that echoed across the marsh. My heart pounded not with fear, but with vindication. The water pressed harder. By 1:15 a.m., the culvert gave way with a thunderous roar. The current shot through like a cannon blast, lifting the roadbed from beneath. Chunks of asphalt folded upward, grotesque and jagged, before snapping free and vanishing into the torrent. It was like watching a body reject a transplant, the land spitting out what didn't belong. I wasn't the only witness. Across the marsh, beams of flashlights pierced the rain. Neighbors stood clustered at the far end of the road, shouting over the storm. I recognized Derek's silhouette, arms flailing as he barked into a useless walkie-talkie. Beside him, Karen clutched a clipboard to her chest, as though paper could shield her from water. Even from a distance, I could see the terror etched on her face. By 1:30 a.m., the road was gone, washed away as though it had never existed. The water didn't pause to celebrate. It surged into the subdivision, rushing down Ridge Hill Drive, flooding yards and swallowing fences. Retaining walls crumbled like sandcastles. I sprinted along the edge of the wetlands, my flashlight catching glimpses of chaos, a plastic playset floating past garbage bins, spinning like toys, a neighbor screaming as his sump pump failed. The frogs remained silent. The land spoke in water now, and it was merciless. At 1:45 a.m., headlights cut through the storm. 3 unmarked county trucks arrived, hazard lights flashing red and orange against sheets of rain. Men in reflective rain gear jumped out shouting orders. One held up a badge as Karen rushed toward him, soaked and trembling. "You can't just storm in here," she yelled. "This is private property." The man didn't flinch. "Ma'am, we've received credible reports of illegal construction, environmental violations, and now infrastructure collapse. This is a county matter." Karen sputtered her words, drowned by thunder. Behind her, Derek shouted into the storm, his khakis soaked to the thighs. Martha stood frozen, white-knuckled hands gripping the agenda packet she must have brought from the meeting. I leaned against a cypress tree, watching the scene unfold. For months they dismissed me, mocked me, branded me the hysterical neighbor. But the storm was delivering justice more brutally than I ever could. Then came the news vans. Channel 7 rolled up their camera crew, braving the storm to capture the collapse. Bright flood lamps lit the shattered road, the swirling brown water, the debris smashing downstream, and then the cameras turned to me. "Mr. Halstead," a reporter shouted, holding her mic close to her mouth to shield it from rain. "You warned them, didn't you? What do you have to say now?" I hesitated. My instinct from years in the army was to stay in the background, not to grandstand. But this wasn't war, it was truth, and the truth needed a voice. I stepped forward, rain dripping from my hood. I gave them documents, I gave them maps, I gave them history. They didn't just ignore it. They destroyed a protected wetland illegally, and now people are paying the price. The reporter's eyes widened, thrilled at the soundbite. Do you think the HOA is responsible? I glanced toward Karen, who stood pale and drenched beside the half-collapsed Welcome to Whispering Pines sign. Her empire was sinking literally and figuratively. I turned back to the reporter. I don't think. I know. By 2:00 a.m., the county crews cordoned off the entire stretch. Residents were evacuated from the lowest lots, huddling at the community center, with towels and thermoses of bad coffee. Some carried their children half asleep in blankets. Others clutched pets, trembling under the storm's fury. I stayed. I couldn't leave. My father's land wasn't just dirt, it was memory, it was promise. I walked the edge of the marsh with the water rising around my boots, camera in one hand, flashlight in the other. I whispered into the storm, "You warned them, and now you've shown them." By dawn, the rain softened into drizzle. The frogs began their chorus again, louder than I'd heard in months. The wetlands, battered but unbroken, had reclaimed what was stolen. Where the road once lay was now a gaping trench filled with swirling brown water and broken asphalt slabs, scattered like bones. Neighbors wandered out in stunned silence, staring at the destruction. Karen stood among them, mascara streaking down her face, hair plastered against her cheeks. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The land had spoken for her. As the sun broke through, the storm clouds casting gold across the wreckage, I felt no joy. Just a heavy, sobering peace. Karma had struck not as revenge, but as restoration. The wetlands had taken back what was theirs. And the board, the residents, the cameras, they couldn't deny it anymore. The morning after the storm, Whispering Pines looked like a crime scene. Not the kind marked with yellow tape and numbered evidence markers, but one etched in mud-splintered fences and slabs of broken asphalt scattered like ribs across the wetlands. The proud green path the HOA had paraded in newsletters was reduced to nothing more than debris caught in tree roots and twisted rebar sticking out of the muck. Residents walked the streets in a day's rain boots, splashing through shallow pools. Some clutched their phones, filming the devastation for social media. Others whispered in clusters, the anger in their voices rising above the croak of frogs returning to the marsh. The facade was gone. Karen couldn't hide this with flowers, live streams, or a cheerful newsletter. By noon, the county issued an official statement. Environmental enforcement had declared the site a restricted zone, no further construction, no access allowed except for inspectors and emergency personnel. To the board, it was a death sentence. To me, it was vindication. But Karen wasn't ready to fold. She never was. That afternoon, the HOA website published a carefully worded statement full of legal jargon and victimhood. The collapse, they claimed, was an unforeseeable act of nature, a freak occurrence. They blamed climate change, and of course me, the adjacent landowner, for failing to maintain natural flood barriers. I laughed out loud when I read it. The audacity was almost admirable. Almost. What Karen didn't count on was the footage. Channel 7 aired the trail cam video I'd submitted, high-definition proof of construction crews pouring asphalt without permits, displayed without signage, without protective barriers. The footage showed the culvert buckling the road, lifting the water, surging exactly as I'd warned. It went viral, shared thousands of times across social media. Comments flooded in classic HOA arrogance. "This is criminal. Nature always wins." By evening, the county zoning board released their own briefing. No valid permits had ever been approved for the project. What Karen had waved around as authorization was nothing but a photocopy of a preliminary draft, never signed, never filed. In other words, forged. That's when Martha cracked. It was just past sunset when I heard a knock at my door. I opened it to find her standing there, soaked from the drizzle, hair disheveled, clutching a manila folder like it was burning her hands. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed red. "I didn't know," she said before I could even speak. Her voice trembled. "Karen told us the paperwork was fine. She said permits were just a formality." I believed her. "But I can't." She stopped, swallowing hard. "I can't go down with them." I let her in. We sat at my kitchen table, wood scarred from years of use, the sound of rain tapping the window behind us. She slid the folder across the table. Inside were meeting minutes, emails, even printed screenshots of text messages between her and Karen. One line burned itself into my brain: "Nobody checks floodplains unless someone complains." I stared at the words, bile rising in my throat. "This is your smoking gun," Martha whispered, her eyes glassy. "Don't let her bury it." I promised I wouldn't. The next morning, Carla had the folder scanned and filed with the county investigator. It didn't take long before subpoenas were issued. Derek was caught shredding documents in his garage when the sheriff served him. Martha's testimony saved her skin, but Derek, he was finished. Karen, though, doubled down. At the emergency HOA meeting called hastily in a half-lit clubhouse with fans humming to dry out damp carpets, she stood in front of the crowd, her voice rising like a preacher on Sunday morning. "They want to blame us," she cried, gesturing wildly. "But we were trying to improve this community. We believed in it, we invested in it, and now we're being persecuted by people who don't see the bigger picture." Her words might have landed months ago, but now they fell flat. I stood from the back of the room, folder in hand. My voice was calm, but sharp. "Karen, you didn't improve anything. You paved over a wetland. You ignored warnings. You falsified permits. You put lives at risk." Her jaw clenched. "You have no proof." "Yes, I do," I said, holding up the folder. "And so does the county. And so does Channel 7, who just uploaded a full investigative report with 18,000 views and counting." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Rivera pushed himself up with his cane. "I lived through the '94 flood. I told you this would happen. You didn't improve a damn thing. You endangered us." Jenny followed. "My backyard flooded because of you. Then a young father from Lot 9. Then another." Voices rose one by one, a chorus of anger. Karen's mask cracked. She shouted about conspiracies, vendettas, witch hunts. Her voice shook, her hands flailed. And then when someone demanded to know what happened to the HOA reserve funds, she snapped. "This is all his fault," she screamed, jabbing a finger at me. "He sabotaged the road. He turned everyone against me." Her voice rang hysterical, unhinged the final nail in her coffin. The room erupted, residents shouting over each other. "Resign," one voice yelled. "Get her off the board," another cried. "I didn't stay to watch the vote. I didn't need to." The outcome was already written in the mud outside. The next morning, a notice was pinned to the HOA bulletin board. "Effective immediately, Karen Ballinger has resigned from the board. An interim president will be appointed pending internal review and special election." Below it was a list of county violations under investigation: forged permits, environmental destruction, property encroachment. I read every line twice. Then I walked to the edge of the wetlands. The cypress trees still stood, reeds bent under the weight of raindrops but swayed upright again. The frogs sang louder than ever, their chorus drowning out the silence Karen left behind. The empire she built on arrogance had collapsed faster than the road itself. But I knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. The law had teeth, and soon it would bite. The weeks that followed Karen's resignation felt surreal, like the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. For years, Whispering Pines had moved to the rhythm of her iron-grip newsletters, written like sermons, meetings controlled like courtrooms, neighbors too afraid or too apathetic to speak up. Now the silence was different. Lawns went unmowed, the HOA email list went quiet, and for the first time in a long time, people looked each other in the eyes instead of glancing nervously over their shoulders. But silence didn't mean safety. The legal process was just beginning, and Karen's shadow still loomed. The county investigator, Leon Matz, from the Department of Environmental Compliance, filed a formal complaint citing environmental violations, property encroachment, and fraudulent permits. The case landed in civil court within weeks, and whispers of criminal charges spread like wildfire. I sat with Carla, my attorney, in her cramped office, stacked with case files and maps. She leaned over the conference table, her finger tapping the pages of evidence we'd compiled: the forged permit photocopy, the trail cam footage, Martha's folder of damning emails. "This isn't just about wetlands anymore," she said. "This is about precedent. If we win, no HOA in this county will dare pull a stunt like this again." Her words hit me hard. I hadn't set out to be a crusader. All I wanted was to protect the land my father spent decades restoring. But somehow this fight had become bigger, about neighbors, ignored laws, bent ecosystems sacrificed for convenience. The courtroom was packed the day of the hearing. Reporters lined the back wall, cameras poised. Neighbors filled every bench, some grim-faced, others hopeful. I wore clean jeans, a button-up shirt, and my father's old watch. I didn't need theatrics. The truth was weight enough. The judge, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and a reputation for zero tolerance, presided with calm authority. Carla opened with precision, her voice slicing through the room. "This is not a case of improvement gone wrong. This is a case of negligence, arrogance, and willful disregard for both law and community safety. The defendants, acting as representatives of the Whispering Pines HOA, falsified permits, ignored environmental warnings, and endangered residents for the sake of property values. One by one, we laid out the evidence. The drone footage of bulldozers ripping through reeds, the trail cam video of the road collapsing under floodwaters, the county map showing flood surge paths, Martha's printed text from Karen instructing her to ignore the complainer. Jenny testified about her flooded backyard. Rivera spoke with fire in his voice about the '94 flood. Each voice added weight to the scale. When it was Karen's turn to answer, she didn't even show. Her lawyer read a bland statement citing health concerns and painting her as a misunderstood leader. Derek sat pale and sweating beside him, flipping through papers with shaking hands. Martha, though, sat behind me, eyes lowered, her presence alone, a quiet confession. The HOA's defense tried everything, blaming unusual weather confusion during leadership transition, even suggesting I had destabilized the wetlands by storing sandbags. The courtroom nearly laughed at that one. I didn't need to. The absurdity spoke for itself. After 2 days of testimony, the judge issued her ruling. Her words were as sharp as the storm that tore the road away. The HOA was guilty of willful negligence construction without permits, violation of environmental codes, and endangerment of community property. The judgment: a restoration order for the wetlands supervised by county and state agencies. A fine of $375,000 levied against the HOA to be collected through special assessments. Personal liability sanctions on Karen and Derek. A permanent injunction: no future development within 300 feet of the wetlands. And most satisfying of all, my name, cleared in official record, my actions described as commendable restraint and due diligence. The gavel struck. It was done. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed me, microphones thrust forward. "Do you feel vindicated?" one asked. I kept it simple. I didn't win today. The land did. That clip played on 3 stations that night. Strangers emailed me thanking me for standing up to an HOA when so many felt powerless. A councilman from a nearby district even called saying, "We need more people like you to remind these boards they're not above the law." But victory didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, the frogs humming in the marsh, the road reduced to memory. For the first time in months, the rain tapping on my roof didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a lullaby. Over the following months, restoration crews arrived in boots and gloves, hauling out debris, replanting native grasses, testing soil. New cypress saplings rose where old ones had been felled. Dragonflies returned iridescent in the Sunday water-cleared minnows, darting beneath the surface. The marsh breathed again, slowly knitting itself back together. The community changed too. The interim board, led by a young couple named Amina and Paul, opened meetings to all residents, no closed doors. They posted minutes online, emailed updates, even asked for feedback. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. For once, the HOA felt like neighbors, not overlords. And Karen, she disappeared almost overnight. A for sale sign appeared in her yard. Word spread she sold at a loss, moved out quietly, no farewell speech, no apology. She left the way cowards always do, running, not facing. I didn't need her apology. The land had spoken louder than she ever could. Weeks later, Jenny and her son brought me a handmade wooden sign. It read Halstead Wetlands, protected by legacy. We staked it into the ground near the marsh entrance. Her son grinned, binoculars dangling from his neck, already naming the birds he wanted to study. Rivera joined us, cane tapping against the mud, eyes misty. "You reminded them," he said softly. "Reminded us all. The land remembers." And I realized he was right. This fight was never just about a road. It was about memory, legacy, and the arrogance of forgetting. When spring came, the marsh bloomed wild and stubborn, as if to prove it never needed permission to heal, and I finally allowed myself to breathe with it. Looking back, I know now the storm wasn't punishment, it was a reckoning. Karen and her board thought they could bend nature to their will, that bylaws and politics outweighed rivers and reeds. But water doesn't sign contracts. The land doesn't care about votes. It remembers, and when pushed too far, it answers. The lesson is simple, but timeless: power built on arrogance collapses while resilience built on truth endures. Whether it's an HOA, a corporation, or just one stubborn neighbor, you can't fake your way past nature or integrity. So if you're watching this, ask yourself, where in your life are you building roads where they don't belong? And are you listening to the warnings or waiting for karma to wash them away? Drop a comment below, tell me where you're watching from, and share if you've ever faced down an HOA or a storm of your own. And don't forget to subscribe because in this channel the land always gets the last word.